Thank you again for having me today. I'm excited to talk about some of the newest stuff that's happening in the Alzheimer's and dementia research space. So again, my name is Hattie Finnerty, and I'm the Director of Community Engagement at the Alzheimer's Association Illinois chapter. I've been with the association a little over 11 years. And for me, just a little quick background, I actually joined the association because it was more personal than professional. My grandma was diagnosed at the age of 69 with dementia, and she was on this journey for almost 15 years. So the last 5 years of her life, we were actually her caregivers. My grandpa passed away, and she moved in with my parents and I, and we took care of her until the day that she passed. So I will say, after this presentation, I hope everyone feels that there's some hope in the research side of things. They're making a lot of new advancements. So there's a lot of good things that are happening right now. And most of us know Alzheimer's, it is a global health problem, right? There's nearly 7 million Americans living with this disease in the United States alone. And there has been tremendous gains, even from when I started many years ago, really trying to understand the science and that basic biology of the disease. These advances are leading to great strides, and what they're focusing now is on strategies for prevention, looking at early detection, diagnostic tools, and then therapeutic interventions. So the Alzheimer's Association is a global leader in research, and we focus on mobilizing the field to advance what our vision is. And our vision is a world without Alzheimer's and all other dementia. So today, I really want to focus on, before I get into some of the learning objectives, a little bit about our logo. Oftentimes we're asked, well, what does your logo stand for? And you're going to see here on this slide, it's really a dual mission symbol, and it represents the abstracts of course, the human head, right? And then from there, it focuses on the science. So it's always the brain and the science. At the association, our work is focused on people and science. And we are a worldwide voluntary health organization. And our mission really is to lead the way to end Alzheimer's and all other dementia by really focusing on accelerating global research, driving risk reduction and early detection, and maximizing that quality care and support. Everything we do when it comes to care and support, whether it's education and awareness in our community, whether it's support groups in our community, whether it's our 24-hour helpline, our advocacy efforts, which we'll see a little bit more about that later, and our research, it's evidence-based, meaning it's rooted in the most up-to-date research in the field. We are recognized by the global scientific community for our unwavering focus on helping people living with dementia and their families every day, and our ability to fund the best science around the world. So today, we will focus on landscape of Alzheimer's and dementia science. So we'll take away just some basic facts and figures regarding Alzheimer's and other dementia. We'll also learn about describing why early detection and diagnosis are important. We'll look at what are biomarkers, why are they needed, and some of the ways that biomarkers are used in dementia research today. Then we're going to look at therapeutic interventions, lifestyle interventions, which I think is everyone's favorite topic, including mine to talk about, risk reduction strategies, and then lastly, just some resources from the Alzheimer's Association. Now, before we get into it, I kind of like to always have like a level setting, and we're going to start talking about the basics of Alzheimer's and dementia, just so everyone is on the same page. What many of you may be aware of is that Alzheimer's disease and other dementias have a huge impact on our society. So these are our new facts and figures this year. And every year, the Alzheimer's Association releases their yearly statistics. For us, it was at the end of April where we saw what was happening in the research side when it came to our facts and figures. What we know is over 260,000 individuals living in Illinois are facing this disease. Up to 4 in 5 Americans feel optimistic right now about these new Alzheimer's treatments. And I think what is really important here is 92% of Americans would want a medication to slow the progression of an Alzheimer's dementia diagnosis. That's huge stuff. And there's a lot right now on the horizon. And we know, of course, care partners are also very heavily impacted. Um, in 2024, there was reports that more than 11 million Americans provided that estimated 18 billion hours of unpaid care. That was valued at nearly $350 billion for people living with Alzheimer's and other dementias. So it is also taking a burden on individuals. Now, many might not know what the difference is between Alzheimer's and dementia, and there are many types of dementia. Alzheimer's disease is the most common cause of dementia. So before we begin, I kind of like to talk about the two terms because we often hear them interchangeably. So when we talk about dementia, I like to describe it, as you see on this slide, as our umbrella term. This is a description of a list of symptoms that are associated with cognitive impairment. This is not normal aging. Years ago, they would say, oh, the person is going senile or they have hardening of the arteries. They thought that was normal aging. This is not normal aging. This is something that is severe enough where it is going to interfere with someone's daily activity. Now, yes, as we get older, we are going to have some typical age related moments. And I give the example of myself. I'm getting my bags in the car for work, I'm getting my kids in the car, and I'm halfway down the street and I'm thinking, did I shut the garage door? That is typical age related moments. And I'm sure if I could see you, most of us would kind of giggle because we all have those moments where it's age related. Or, and I like to give this example where maybe, you're in the middle of talking and you're thinking, what was that word I was going to say? And then it eventually comes to us. So the best way I like to describe it is dementia is our umbrella term. Underneath it is these lists of symptoms, but they're so severe enough where it catches us off guard. Yes, these symptoms can be cognitive symptoms, but also we might start to see behavioral and psychological symptoms. Maybe someone is hallucinating. Maybe now they're having sleep disturbances, or we're starting to see their social filter is gone and they're talking loudly about people and there's aggression and agitation. All these symptoms are due to the underlying biological changes that are happening in the brain that are really associated with specific brain changes. Alzheimer's, it is a disease and it is a biological cause of dementia. So 60 to 80% of cases is Alzheimer's disease. The only true way to know is by getting a diagnosis. Not everything is Alzheimer's or dementia. We start to see that with maybe people that have depression or thyroid abnormalities or substance abuse issues, vitamin deficiencies. Once they get treatment for this, they start to feeling like their normal selves again. Now, we also have common dementias that you will see here. Of course, like I mentioned, Alzheimer's the most common form, but now we have vascular dementia. This is sometimes associated with a stroke, that impaired blood flow to the brain. We need 25% of oxygen flow to go to the brain. When that stops, some individuals develop a stroke. So we might see that in some individuals where, let's say they suffer from a stroke and now they're not coming out of that brain fog, let's say. We'll also see Lewy body dementia. So here, some of it is sometimes can be associated with Parkinson's. So we're going to see shaking, shuffling, hallucinations, frontal temporal dementia. And we just heard most recently that Bruce Willis is living with this diagnosis. So this is associated more with mood rather than memory. Individuals are diagnosed in their middle 40s to early 50s. And really here, they start to become non-communicative very early on. One of the things that makes it difficult to diagnose and treat Alzheimer's and other dementias is that concept of mixed dementia. as you can see on the slide. This is where researchers are really focused today on trying to develop those new ways to accurately diagnose those biological changes. But I want to just make sure that everyone knows on this call, the Alzheimer's Association provides care and support for and supports all causes of dementia. So it's not just Alzheimer's disease. So if you or your loved one is dealing with any type of dementia, we are here to help you. So what are these changes that are happening in the brain? Now we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about what's happening in the brain with Alzheimer's. There are three hallmark brain changes that occur in Alzheimer's that you can see here. We have our plaques. So those are also known those are also known as the beta amyloid plaques. Those are the buildup of the protein that sits outside those nerve cells or the neurons in our brains. We also have another type of protein called tau. The changes in the tau protein can actually create tau tangles. The tau tangles occur inside the nerve cells of our brain, and they start to decrease the nerve cells' overall communication. So here's our ability to transport chemicals and nutrients across the cells. Both of these are associated or believed to contribute to what is that overall brain cell death that occurs in the brain, which most of us hear of it as neurodegeneration. And that cellular death is occurring in areas of the brain that are important for our memory, our thinking, and our behavior. And you can see by the brain on the right side of this screen that you're looking at a healthy brain. There is no buildup of beta amyloid plaques or tangles. So the first thing that becomes affected in I like to say an Alzheimer's or dementia brain is our hippocampus. That is I like to say our memory bank. That's the formation of new memories. So when you're speaking to someone and 5 minutes later they're asking the same question and you're thinking, I just said that, and another 5 minutes they're asking the same question, it's because they're not retaining that recently learned information. So as we begin to understand the changes in the brain more, we also understand that these brain changes begin before symptoms occur. So when we talk about Alzheimer's disease being a continuum, we mean that changes are starting to happen over time. The first stage of asymptomatic means an individual has no cognitive symptoms, but there are some biological changes that is happening to the brain beforehand. So we're going to notice that biological changes such as buildup of the amyloid plaques, the tau tangles, can begin anywhere up to 20 years before symptoms start. So oftentimes people will ask, well, then what happens? So maybe it's a traumatic brain injury that ignites the symptoms, or maybe it's a tragic event like a death, right? That can maybe cause these symptoms to start. As we move through this continuum, symptoms of cognitive decline begin to appear as the brain changes continue and the brain cell death starts. And for the purpose of this slide, the initial symptom beginning means mild cognitive impairment, also known as MCI. MCI means someone is living in the early stage of cognitive loss. It does not necessarily affect most of their daily activities, but there are some noticeable changes that will start to exist. Someone who will go on to develop dementia due to Alzheimer's then is passing through an additional phase, which means they will experience the mild, moderate, and severe stages. Some of us have heard of it as early, middle, and late stage. Not everyone that has MCI, though, has MCI due to Alzheimer's. So when we say, and I like to do quotes, due to Alzheimer's, it means that there are underlying brain changes that are starting to happen, like maybe they have amyloid plaques or tau tangles in the brain. But you can have MCI, and that can also be associated with just potential side effects. Maybe it's medication side effects, or maybe it's even vascular disease. So it's important here, and I always emphasize, not everyone who has MCI goes on to develop dementia. However, those who do have MCI are at a risk for developing in the future. So it's really important to define what is that cause of mild cognitive impairment, and then how do we get it to diagnose at the earliest stage. If we know that, this provides an opportunity for treatment and potential prevention. So if we can prevent new cases of MCI, we possibly could be also preventing new cases of dementia. Now, I know I don't really focus a lot on the different stages, but I will point out just a couple things. In the early mild stage, symptoms will start to interfere with some daily activities here, especially for individuals let's say that are maybe working. We've heard people say that they have maybe been frozen behind their desk and they don't even know what the first thing they need to do is. For most individuals, we know when we come to work every day, the first thing we do is turn on our computer. So these are subtle changes that are starting to happen. If anyone on this call has seen the movie Still Alice, that's a wonderful reflection of the early stages of this disease. Julianne Moore was the character. She was an avid runner. Every day she would run through the college campus near her home. And one day she sat there frozen. She didn't know, do I go left? Do I go right? How do I get home? That is something that's severe enough. If so and no one has watched it, or if you have, it's a wonderful film to watch. And it's currently right now on um, Netflix. And I see a comment in here. And yes, there are also dementias caused by UTIs. And yes, we don't really touch on that, but again, that's something that we say a reversible dementia. So UTIs, you're going to start to see sudden behavior changes, and you're wondering where did it come from, because oftentimes it comes unannounced and it comes quick. So that's why I always like to say it's not always Alzheimer's or dementia. It could be, like I mentioned early on, medication side effects, urinary tract infections. It could be several things. So thank you for that. And I'm also trying to look at the chat just in case so I don't miss anything. So when we move into middle to moderate, here we're going to start to see different changes. So perhaps, you're asking someone what they would like to eat for lunch, and you're saying, do you want a ham and cheese sandwich? Do you want a grilled cheese, or do you want turkey and cheese? And they might just say, well, I'm not hungry. That to them is too many options. So you might have to condense it and maybe give one option, or you just don't give them an option and you just give them the food. And again, I'm touching briefly on these. We have a whole entire presentation on understanding Alzheimer's or dementia that kind of goes more into a deep dive of some of these stages. But here also, you're going to notice even getting dressed, something that used to be, of course, easy for them, now is starting to become difficult, zipping up their shirt, buttoning their shirt, maybe putting on their pants. And then in the late stages or severe stage, this is going to interfere with all daily activities. You might notice that the person is pointing to the things that they want. They're not using a lot of vocabulary words. Some might become non-communicative. So we're focusing on still maintaining their independence and then going from there. Now, the next portion that we're going to focus on is the benefits of an early and accurate diagnosis. So here, we're going to focus on why an early diagnosis is important, especially when we're focusing on emotional, social, and medical benefits for individuals. An early diagnosis can help people diagnosed with Alzheimer's make planning decisions. And I just say here, they can be part of this planning process, right? What happens if I can no longer live at home? Am I going to live at home and have full-time care? Am I going to move in with my children, or will I have to move into a community that can support me? Medical benefits, this includes access to current treatments. So the disease modifying treatments that are currently FDA approved are only approved right now for the early stages of this disease. And we'll see more about that in the upcoming slides. So it's important to get an early diagnosis to be able to discuss these treatments as an option. Also, we know that clinical trials play an enormous role in helping to find the newest and best treatments and potentially a cure for this disease. Participating in a clinical trial has many benefits in terms of maximizing an individual's healthcare and their ability to really potentially receive some of these treatments that will be FDA approved in the future. Also, one of these medical benefits also gives individuals a chance to really prioritize their health and start to make those healthier lifestyle changes. So in addition to these medical benefits, there are more emotional benefits, such as, like I mentioned, planning for the future, having access to resources, and then also making those end of life decisions as well. Now, for the financial benefits, an early diagnosis for families, the US government, overall, an early diagnosis is important for so many factors of daily life that need to be considered. But now, we're going to move into how we are currently diagnosing Alzheimer's disease. So you're going to see here that Oh, excuse me. Let me go back another slide. That's a repetition. So there is now one single test, right? Years ago, it used to be with, 90% of accuracy, they can diagnose it. Now it's with 100% of accuracy because we're in something called the biomarker revolution, which we'll get into in the next slide. However, years ago, it would just be a paper and pencil test. Now we're moving into incorporating biomarkers. We're looking at the diagnostic workup. So this slide doesn't go into full detail, but I will touch on this. When someone goes to the doctor, oftentimes they are accompanied by, a loved one, let's say. Most of the time at this point, the family member has already started writing down everything that they're starting to experience. So when we're at the doctor, we're bringing our current medication. They're going to look at past medication. They're going to look at the vitamins you're taking. Then they're going to interview the family member to see, are they going, what are they experiencing? That's where the journal comes in too. And then the person going through some of the memory changes, maybe they're experiencing depression. They're going to look to see, is it a urinary tract infection? Are they going to test the blood and urine for, any kind of infection? Then they're going to go into the mental status exam. Here, they are testing, we've all heard the hands of a clock. I've heard most recently they're actually asking individuals to repeat the alphabet backwards. I can't do that. I'm not sure how someone that is having memory impairment can, but that's a really good way to test your cognition to keep your brain active is start repeating that alphabet backwards. And then they're going to go into the neurological exam, testing our speech, our eye movement, coordination and balance, reflexes. And then from there, they're going to move into brain imaging. So here it's going to be an MRI. In communities where they have access to PET scans, it will be a PET scan to see what is happening to the brain. Are they having shrinkage of the brain? Is it a stroke? Is it a tumor? What is exactly happening? After they compile all of that, which takes hours, then from there, they will go into focusing on what is the diagnosis. Now, most individuals start by getting an appointment with their primary care doctor. Then from there, they will move into a neurologist that specializes with Alzheimer's or dementia, or they will move into a geriatric specialist. Again, they have to specialize with Alzheimer's or dementia. Now, getting an appointment with a neurologist could take sometimes several months to get into it. That's why I encourage people, if they are starting to see signs and they're not sure what it is it dementia? Is it maybe, medication side effects? I encourage everyone to talk to their doctor about it first and start that kind of process going and start getting onto that route of early detection because a lot of these these therapies that we're going to talk about in the next slides are for the people in the early stages of this disease. So you're going to want to know sooner so you can be on these. Now, what is a biomarker? Over the past few years, we've seen an enormous amount of research focused on developing new biomarkers for Alzheimer's disease and other dementia. So when we say biomarkers, we're specifically talking about the tools and technologies that are going to be able to help us tell those changes that might be happening in our body. Biomarkers are both predictors and indicators of the disease and the disease progression. A lot of you are probably quite familiar with some of these types of biomarkers. We use them to understand your risk for heart disease by measuring cholesterol in your blood. You can even look at your glucose numbers by looking at a blood test. So we need these types of tools and technologies for Alzheimer's and other dementia. We've seen advances in brain imaging, like the image you can see, on this slide here. In Alzheimer's, there are a multitude of use for biomarkers, similar to what we've already experienced in other diseases. They're going to help us determine that diagnosis, like I mentioned, help to determine if someone is even fit for a clinical trial, and we're going to look at the disease progression over time. You can use these to track outcomes and side effects also of these treatments, especially in these new therapies out there. They're constantly getting brain imaging to see what's happening to the brain. So as you can see, even just thinking through what a biomarker is, you can understand this is going to be the new frontier in Alzheimer's detection, diagnosis, and research. Now we're going to dive into different types of biomarkers. So we're going to start off with imaging. This includes brain PET imaging, which is the type of brain scan also known as the PET scan. Many of you have heard of it. It's posterior emission tomography. The type of scan we're specifically talking about today is for amyloid and even tau PET imaging. So it's really about focusing to really look at those two hallmarks diseases, and both of these tau and amyloid imaging markers are approved by the FDA for these types of scans. So the scan information can help to exclude Alzheimer's disease from the cause of cognitive problems and may also aid in the diagnostic process. The other part is MRI, which can look like at those structural changes that are starting to happen in the brain. This will help doctors really rule out other symptoms that can be causing dementia symptoms and track treatment side effects. One of the ways researchers are working today is to include fluid biomarkers. So you're going to see here cerebrospinal fluid analysis. Here with CSF, they're looking at these emerging blood tests to aid in, again, the diagnostic process. There are 4 FDA approved tests for CSF, and you might have heard the news also about the new approved blood test that is aiding in the diagnostic process. So I want to emphasize here that there's not a standalone right now. These blood tests are helping part of this process right now. There are several emerging biomarkers that are happening, and I always like to give this example, but imagine if one day you were able to walk into your doctor's office and actually get a retinal imaging scan or even a saliva sample that could actually give you some indication of risk developing Alzheimer's disease or another dementia in the future. I know it sounds quite futuristic to some people, but researchers are really working on those approaches right now. There's a lot more that still needs to be done to make sure that all these biomarkers, of course, are standardized. They have to be validated and become very reliable tools for predicting risk and diagnosing the disease. Now, the Alzheimer's Association is supporting research efforts that will help push the field forward when we are thinking about biomarkers for Alzheimer's. So the previous slide discussed the ways we can measure the markers of Alzheimer's, but right now, most of these measures look at the levels of 2 of the changes, beta amyloid and the tau. Researchers are now exploring even more measures, such as markers of cell death in the brain. They're looking at brain inflammation, they're looking at vascular changes in the brain, all to help better understand what is happening in the brain during this disease progression. Now, the Alzheimer's Association supports efforts to fund new and emerging biomarkers and really to help move that research forward. The Alzheimer's Association leads the Global Biomarker Standardization Consortium. That's a mouthful, but what it is it aims to just do this and brings together researchers from across the globe. Finally, the last step is bringing these new biomarkers to start reaching the doctor's offices. The Alzheimer's Association is really focused on leading the efforts to publish recommendations and guidance for doctors regarding imaging, fluid, and other diagnostic tools for Alzheimer's disease. So it's again aimed to prevent, a strategy to help determine the most valuable test when it comes to detection, diagnosis, and treatment for this disease. So as we discussed through this biomarker section, we're now going to move into the treatment portion. So we're going to look right now at the FDA approved therapies for Alzheimer's. In 1906, that was the first description of this disease, and that was by Alois Alzheimer's. His first patient was a goose eater, and it was a woman in her early 50s. Back then, we were in something called the scientific revolution, meaning he diagnosed this underneath a microscope. Now, like I mentioned earlier, we are in a biomarker revolution. From 1996 through 2014, we had medications that just treated the symptoms. Many of you are familiar with maybe Aricept, and you can see the progress from there. So in orange, these are medications that only treat the cognitive and functional symptoms of this disease. These are called acetylcholine inhibitors and glutamate modulators. These drugs will not slow down They don't modify, stop, or reverse the disease process. Again, only temporarily relieving the cognitive and functional symptoms. And the way I like to describe these drugs is they have the ability to sort of increase the efficiency of the cells and how they talk and listen to each other, but they don't necessarily prevent the cells from dying. And that's really important because to slow down the disease process, we need to prevent these cells from dying in the first place. So, a lot of research that we're seeing today is focused on drugs aimed at preventing the cells from dying or maintaining that cellular health. In 2020, we saw a drug called Belsorma, which the FDA previously approved to treat insomnia, but in clinical trials in people with Alzheimer's, this drug was really demonstrated to be safe and effective with individuals living with this disease. Now it's included in the prescribing information for this drug that it is safe for individuals that have Alzheimer's or dementia. So this new drug now treats sleep disturbances, and that can be associated, of course, with Alzheimer's disease. In 2023, the FDA approved a second drug that will slow down the disease process. So they first started, and it's not on here, with something called Aduhelm. That was discontinued, and they moved into Leqembi and Kinsella. These drugs here change the course of Alzheimer's disease in a meaningful way. And I should stop saying drugs because they are actually therapies. They are IV infusions. And what they are doing is giving more time for individuals in the early stages of this disease. Now, if someone has an early diagnosis and now they're looking to be part of these therapies, they would meet with the genetic counselor. The genetic counselor will let them know if they're eligible. So, for instance, if someone is on blood thinners, they're not eligible to be on this. But if they are eligible, it's an 18-month cycle. They are monitored through PET scans to see what is happening to the brain, changes in the brain, through this whole entire cycle of being on this. Also in 2023, the FDA approved something called Relxuti. I'm sure most of you have seen that commercial. And this is to help agitation. It's important to also continue to develop medications that target those behavioral and psychological symptoms of this disease, because we really want to focus on really improving that quality care and support for caregivers, right? It's a challenging behavior and it helps caregivers as well through this, and giving people a more meaningful way for people in these early stages is these new therapies. So there's a lot of hope on the horizon. I want to focus too on the drug pipeline. Today, there's over 140 unique therapies being tested in clinical trials that target multiple aspects of Alzheimer's biology. So you're going to see here, they're looking at, cellular communication, bioenergetics of cells, how they use energy. They're going to target neuroinflammation or vascular stress. For all of these trials, even more when not focused only on Alzheimer's disease, the number of participants needed in clinical trials is large. So I'll talk a little bit more about how you can get involved in trials in a little bit. But while we consider the current progress in the field, I also want to emphasize how the Alzheimer's Association is really supporting the diversification of the disease pipeline and how the ongoing progress is happening in this disease space. So I hope you can appreciate the number of therapies right now that are in the pipeline. 140 is huge. And some of them will also focus on really the effectiveness, right? They're going to look to see what a lot of these therapies are doing. They're going to look at purpose drugs. Like, for instance, a couple of years ago, they were really focused on the Ozempic drug. Some of these are going to be repurposed. So there's going to be a lot that will be coming out, especially throughout the next year, on some of these new therapies. But also, I want to look at the combination of drug therapies and brain healthy lifestyle factors that can contribute to that maximize lifestyle factors. So we're going to talk about lifestyle factors soon, and that's probably my favorite part of this program. But also, the association is actively funding the DIAN-2, and that's Dominantly Inherited Alzheimer's Network Trials Unit, where they're combining that anti-amyloid therapies already with the FDA-approved anti-tau treatments. So in this study, they're looking at the pipeline of therapeutics to bring new approaches to therapeutics. Like I mentioned, 28% of the drugs in the pipeline are drugs that are being repurposed from other diseases to see if they will work on dementia. The Alzheimer's Association has also part the cloud grant program has invested in $68 million in 65 early stage clinical trials. So with the new treatments in development for all stages of the disease continuum, there is a lot of hope and excitement that could be coming up next. And that's where I'm really going to shift now the focus onto risk reduction. So, let me skip this. Here with risk reduction, we're going to look at what are modifiable risk factors and non-modifiable risk factors. Based on research that we're seeing across the globe, we know there are things that make up our risk that are, of course, non-modifiable. But when we talk about non-modifiable, we're talking about things we can't change. We can't change our age. We can't change our genetics. We know Alzheimer's and dementia is not normal aging, and age is the biggest risk factor for developing this disease. After the age of 65, people's chances increase every 5 years. After the age of 85, it's like a 50% chance of developing this disease. We know genetics plays a role, family history plays a role, but when we think about those modifiable risk factors, we're thinking about physical activity, cardiovascular health, which I'll talk about in the next slide, our sleep, our diet. What are those environmental and lifestyle factors? These are things that we can change. So I always encourage people focus on things that we can change to better overall our overall brain health. Now, the Alzheimer's Association launched something called the 10 healthy habits for your brain. And what they are saying is and actually it's changed, up to 45% of dementia cases could be prevented or delayed by targeting modifiable risk factors. So what we know is combining multiple healthy factors may be the most impactful. So focus on eating right, the mind diet, the Mediterranean diet. We've all heard the saying of shop the perimeter of the grocery store, don't go into the inner aisles. Physical health and exercise. Average adults just need 2.5 hours of exercise a week. So what does that look like? We've all heard start small and build up. If you don't exercise, it's starting small, going for a 20-minute walk. Little things that can overall make a bigger impact. Our cognitive activity. What are you doing to keep your brain active? And one of the tips I always give when I'm talking about healthy habits is trick your brain. Something simple as brushing your teeth. If you brush your teeth with your right hand, trick your brain and brush your teeth with your left hand. I know it sounds silly, but when we're on autopilot brushing our teeth, these are things that we can switch up. Of course, protect your head from traumatic brain injury, wear a helmet, maintain a healthy weight, keeping our cardiovascular factors in check. Now, the Alzheimer's Association just launched something called our brain health campaign. Your brain's health is in your hands. I like for you to meet the brain, and her name is Sarabella. And the brain, regardless of your age, it's important to protect your brain health. So these are things that we talk about. So if you go onto our website, yourbrainwillthankyou.com, you will start to see a lot of these. They talk about going for a walk. Try something new with your recipes, cook with color. And these are things that you can go, there's recipe tips, there's tips for like working out, getting good night's sleep. Sleep is so important. They're saying that we need 7 to 9 hours of sleep an evening. Think about like your sleep hygiene. And the reason they're saying that is because when we sleep, we're resting and recharging. We're clearing out the toxins of the brain to start fresh the next day. I don't know about you, but if I'm on like 4 hours of sleep the next day, I feel like I have brain fog. My brain doesn't function as it normally would. Now, the important thing here, and I love this slide, is because the Alzheimer's Association embarked in a 2-year clinical study called the US Pointer Study. So with the US Pointer Study, individuals had to be eligible to go into this study. There was over 2,000 participants that participated in 5 sites across the United States. Chicagoland was one of them. It was Rush and Advocate, Aurora Health that were part of this study. So once participants went into this study, they had two different tracks. They had a self-guided and a structured intervention. And they were really looking at the multi-domain approach for risk reduction. What they focused on were a lot of these modifiable risk factors. So what we saw after the US pointer results were released, and I'll talk about that in a second, was that a lot of these risk factors that we see now, they really are helping. So these individuals had to be eligible. They had to have a parent or a sibling that had memory loss. They had to be cognitively healthy. However, they had to have means of improvement. So maybe they had a horrible diet or a sedentary lifestyle. Once they went into this study, the structured intervention met with the US Pointer Navigator. And for weeks, they logged everything that they ate. They submitted the data. Also, what else they did was they focused on their activity. What did they do for physical health and exercise? All of them wore like a Fitbit tracker, so they couldn't lie and say, oh, today I walked 12,000 steps. Because the tracker could say, well, really, you walked 6,800. So it focused on all of that. They submitted the data. They worked on tracking everything. At the end, at actually July 31st of this year, they released the results of this 2-year clinical study. And what they found was that individuals that were in the structured trial were measuring up to be 2 years less than what they were in their age. So for instance, I have a volunteer who was part of this trial. She went and did her like follow-up, and she's a 68-year-old woman now. The people had to be, and you'll see her 60 to 79 years old. She was measuring up to be someone that's 65 years old. So everything that she was doing was helping her in her brain health. The next part of this now is going to be the implementation stage. So they're going to focus now on implementing that. And you can see here, this is kind of our US pointer, our recipe card, I like to say. Our physical exercise, keeping our brains active is so important. I know out there are a lot of claims, and I've seen the commercial, especially when people are thinking about taking Prevagen. These don't work. So I always tell people, please don't waste your money. Focus on healthy habits. Start small and build into these, right? Maybe it's trying to have a better diet, maybe adding more fruits and vegetables. What they focused on diet was berries. They knew the berries were great. Olive oil, a tablespoon of olive oil a day. Some of them drink it. I don't necessarily know if you want to drink it, but focus on those habits. Lean meats. They were asking for seafood twice a week, dark leafy vegetables. I think the list can go on. A lot of us, we know this. But the excitement was that this actually worked, and it was showing healthy behaviors across multiple factors have a powerful impact on brain health, which was exciting. Now, here you're going to also see the different initiatives the Alzheimer's Association is doing. Right now, you'll see the increase in funding with the NIH. These research dollars are going to new innovative ideas, right? And I want to thank our advocates, because it's a phenomenal thing to see. A lot of this is due because of their dedication. We have been fiercely working with our advocates for years to ensure that we continue growth in the research side of things, which is very important because we want a lot of time to have new innovative ideas and start looking at different things. We'll see here, we looked at drugs, we looked at therapeutics, right, for people in the early stages, and now they're focusing on lifestyle. I also want to point out the Alzheimer's Association on this slide has a global impact. There's more than 450 currently right now $1 million of grants in action, making it possible in more than 1,200 research projects in 56 countries, spanning 6 out of the 7 continents except Antarctica. So there's research happening all around the world. I like to say when we're sleeping, someone's in a lab working on maybe it's the next, maybe it's a prevention or the next therapy, but everybody's working on to find a cure for this disease. Because as you know, right now, there is no cure. Also, the association is focusing on advancing health equity. Right now, there's an urgent need for the inclusion of individuals of underrepresented backgrounds in clinical trials so that new discoveries can benefit all, right? Not just one population. So legislation like the ENACT Act, which is Equity in Neuroscience and Alzheimer's Clinical Trials Act, this will increase education and outreach to underserved, underrepresented communities, encouraging diversity of clinical trial staff and making it easier for underrepresented groups to participate in research. So this is something federal advocates through AIM have been instrumental in supporting. Also, science moves fast. So I like to stay up to speed on this. If you like to visit our website, you can see there are a lot of the research that's happening. Also, going on to alz.org research for Alzheimer's research in the dementia space, the latest and breaking things. Or if you want to be part of Trial Match, what we'll talk about in a second. But one of the key resources that I always talk about is our 24-hour helpline. It's available, and the number here, 800-272-3900. These are master level clinicians. They're available day and night, and they are here to help, whether it's in the moment needs or maybe you're looking for information and referrals. So if you're interested in getting involved in research, I encourage you to check out Trial Match. Everyone can get involved in research. I have my own profile on Trial Match, and I can do it in the comfort of my home. They're sending me brain games and testing my cognition. And I know it might sound easy, but when you're under a clock and you're trying to match something and you have 60 seconds to do it, trust me, you become overwhelmed by that. So again, this is a free clinical study service. There's tons of different trials that are going on right now. But I want to end on a good note before I take questions is there is hope in research, and the Alzheimer's Association is really leading that global research community. It's a very exciting time in research today. We have new tools, we have new technologies, and really therapies that are being developed every day to really detect and diagnose this disease in a better way to understand it. So we're really hoping, it will be the way we discover a way to slow, stop, or maybe hopefully prevent the disease from happening in the first place.